Going back even further, we know the Barker hypothesis. We know that early life nutritional exposures are linked to the physical health outcomes of offspring. We know that nutritional deficiencies during pre and early postnatal periods can have a detrimental impact on brain development. We know from some of the epidemiological data that maternal exposure to famine during pregnancy results in an elevated risk for major depression in offspring, and that's been shown in 2 key studies. And there's now a whole host of preclinical studies that I made reference to before, not only looking at the impact of dietary exposures on things like BDNF and stress response system and oxidative stress, etc., but looking at this maternal diet paradigm where they feed the pregnant rat or mouse or some cases non-human primates a diet that's like a typical Western diet, high levels of saturated fat, refined sugar, and then look at a whole range of outcomes in offspring. And I'll refer to those in more detail in just a moment. But for these reasons, I was very interested to look at very early life nutritional exposures and mental health outcomes in offspring, because we've looked in great detail at physical health but not at mental health. So to do this, we were successful in getting funding from NASAD in the USA to go and do a study in the largest cohort study in the world. It's a Norwegian study called the Mother and Baby Cohort Study. And this is the paper that was published last month in the Journal of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, which is the leading journal of paediatric research, psychiatric paediatric research. And we had a sample of over 23,000 mothers and their children, followed from when mum was in pregnancy to when children were 5 years of age. We looked at pre- and postnatal diet quality. So using these statistical methods for determining dietary patterns, we looked at mum's diet during pregnancy. And during the pregnancies, they filled in these extremely comprehensive food frequency questionnaires. But then the children's diet at 6 months, 18 months and 36 months. And then we looked at children's mental health, measured up using internalising and externalising. So internalising correlates with depression, anxiety type symptoms, and it's a vulnerability factor for later mood and anxiety disorders. And externalising, which is tantrums and aggressive behaviour that correlates with conduct problems, etc., and also is very strongly linked to later mental health disorders. And we used very complex statistical models, but importantly taking into account a whole range of factors. So maternal and paternal age, maternal education, parental income, marital status, maternal depression and anxiety, obviously extremely important in predicting both diet of the children and the children's mental health. Maternal smoking before and during pregnancy, whether mum worked at home or was in the paid workforce, parity in gestational length, and also parental locus of control, which is linked to mental health of the parents and also the mental health and the diets of the children. Taking all of those into account, and I won't show you the graphs because they're really complicated, but you can certainly read that paper and look at those very nice pictures. And in summary, what we found was that there was an independent contribution of mum's diet during pregnancy to externalising behaviours in children. In that mums who had higher intakes of junk and processed foods during pregnancy, regardless of what the children ate in the first few years, the kids had higher levels of externalising behaviours. Not internalising, but externalising. Now, this has also just been replicated in another large-scale study, and this accords with the preclinical work in animal models. But then, of course, what the children ate was very important. So both higher intakes of unhealthy food and lower intakes, I've written it differently here, but the same effect, lower intakes of nutrient-dense foods in the first few years of life, both linked to higher levels of internalising and externalising behaviour over that 5-year period. So this is the first human data that supports what the animal models are telling us, that what mum has during pregnancy and what children eat in those first early years when their brain is very plastic are clearly linked to mental health outcomes. Now, we want to, of course, follow these children over time. The other thing I'd say is that when we looked at the relative effect sizes, because we go, okay, well, you know, are these very large effects, very small effects, or somewhere in the middle? So what we did was that we standardised them and compared them to the relationship of maternal depression to the mental health outcomes in kids. Because we know, of course, that maternal depression will be closely linked to mental health outcomes. And indeed, what we found was that some of the dietary exposures were of a similar magnitude to that of maternal depression. So we're not talking about trivial effects. From the experimental data, we've seen already that maternal high-fat sugar diet alters methylation and gene expression of the dopaminergic and opioid-related genes. And this is very well described. And this is, in fact, where we see this intergenerational transmission of obesity is coming not just from the environment, but from a direct impact on the reward system. So offspring, and we've seen this in humans as well, that children of mothers who ate a lot of these unhealthy foods during pregnancy, they find these foods even more addictive, highly palatable. They're and they are addictive. We see changes in the serotonergic system that are sustained over the lifespan of the offspring. And this was in non-human primates. And that related to increased anxiety in females and increased aggression in males. Weaning of offspring onto a high-fat diet resulted in the upregulation of inflammatory and oxidative stress pathways and mitochondrial dysfunction, which we know is really important in psychiatric illness. Maternal Western diet increased sympathetic nervous system activity, and certainly omega-3 fatty acids have an important role in the stress response system, and hyperactivity in rodent offspring that persisted into adulthood. So this seems to have implications for the bipolar disorder animal model. Deficiencies in omega-3 fatty acids, we know this is very well described. During the inter-utero development and early life, they reduce brain plasticity and increase anxiety-like behaviours, certainly in animal models. And this is an interesting one. Maternal high-fat diet also affects the mother's behaviour, so it results in reduced maternal care by the dams during the early life of offspring, so it affects the mothering as well. So these are just this is just a snapshot of some of the work that's coming out of the experimental animal models, showing what you eat when you're pregnant has a really potent impact on physiological systems right through in the offspring. And it's not just limited to a child's risk for later cardiovascular disease.